Hello and welcome to the New Space Vision podcast sponsored by SatVu, where we discuss new space technology, finance, and innovation with executive founders and more exciting people from the startup and new space ecosystem. I'm Sim Shivara.
And I'm Daniel Seidel, and together we are the founders of the Earth observation company SatVu and New Space Vision. Today, we are here with Anthony Baker, who is the founder and CEO of SatVu, which is launching a constellation of high-resolution thermal satellites. And I'm really excited because, Anthony, you are a space veteran, and I checked actually that you graduated in satellite communications 35 years ago when I was born, actually. So that's definitely a lot of competence, experience. So I'm really excited to talk to you. And maybe as a quick intro, you can tell us your quick story of your space journey.
Yes, I was fortunate enough to, as you say, graduate in satellite communications in the UK in Surrey, and landed and followed that career all the way. So started off in with the regulator, finding orbital locations and spectrum, and then moved to NATO for a while in the Netherlands, then off to Hong Kong for my first commercial gig, and worked for a scaling up company there. And then from there to a startup back in the Netherlands, involved in lots of M&A and mergers. And then I guess Qatar. I went to Qatar and was the first CEO of a company starting up in Qatar. And then from there, I came back to London and started SatVu. And and we've had an interesting journey with that company too.
And we will dive deep into exactly the story of SatVu in a second. But maybe first, what motivated you to start the company in the first place? And with all that experience which brought you, which you got until then, why did you decide to start a thermal company, to be precise?
So I was in Qatar, and that mission was about satellite broadcasting, and we were looking at what else does a small country need, and it was eyes over the border, looking at supply chains, looking at exports, looking pollution, etc., and trying to find the sources, and just naturally curiosity about what's beyond the border, and you can't always fly with planes and drones, etc., without permission. So satellites seemed like a great answer. So we started looking at solutions around that. But why thermal? Well, I was looking at the ocean, and there was plastic in the ocean, and I read a report by actually a French agency who said that 80% of plastic in the ocean comes from 10 rivers in the world. And I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
But the report was 2 years old. It took 2 years to collect this data. So it was already out of date. So was it getting better? Was it getting worse? There must be a better way of doing this. And satellites seemed like a good solution. And just reading a few research papers that, infrared could have been a solution for this. And so that sort of perked my interest. So ultimately, the development wasn't going to be pursued in Qatar. So I went back to London, set up SatVu, and spent a number of years working out what the marketing problem was, who was going to buy the data, and then coming up with a technical solution. Because it turns out that plastic in the ocean is very important, and I felt very passionate about it, but nobody wants to buy that data. So you couldn't make a business out of that insight.
Yeah. Until there might be a regulatory change, right? Then people have the willingness potentially to pay. Until then, it's oftentimes very difficult to get people to pay for the good causes out there.
True.
Yeah.
And on the website, there are other co-founders listed, right? So how did you find them?
So clearly, I'm the satellite guy here, but that's only half the issue. So that, as you'll appreciate, the data processing, the way you present the data, making it useful, turning pixels into useful insights, you need another type of skill set. And so or one of my co-founders, Toby, was very adept at that. He was a user of the data, which I like users because they know what they want and they know the problems of suppliers. And to put him into the supplier role, I was pretty sure that we built products and information insights that people wanted to the quality they wanted. And so we met in London at a charity event, like a hackathon, looking at why Earth observation data was so hard to ingest in disaster. So it was a UN application of the data, the aggregation of that and the timiness and the definition of the problem was very, very difficult. And we thought that we could help out with that. And so that's where that started.
Yeah. And did you had like private savings, or like how did you start the first year, or did you had investors from the get-go very early? So
no, we didn't. Not for a long time, actually. So I was running a consultancy, and I was a consultancy both in my old job, which was around enabling companies to expand and do business development, but also helping Earth observation companies get access to the Middle East market, because I think the project we did in Qatar became quite infamous in that it was, on time, on budget, was successful. They did an amazing job. And so I was hoping that other countries would want to replicate that, which they did, but these things take a long, long time, especially when they're government funded. And so we sort of ran out of time. But that gave me the bandwidth and the access to Earth observation customers, the manufacturers, to understand what the problems were. Why aren't we using Earth observation data more in our everyday lives?
Yeah.
And why is it so difficult? And to try and crack those problems. And what is the next big phenomenology that will transform insights? So it was clearly deliver the products and answer questions that people are interested in on that side, and make it easy. And on the phenomenology side, it seemed like seeing in the dark, and having like optical rather than the SAR seeing in the dark. So something that people could easily interpret. And it turned out that you could actually see economic activity inside buildings from the mission. So you could see what's on, what's off, what's working, what's not. That was fascinating, and no one had done this. And so that was a great technical problem to solve. So those early years were defining the problem, defining the market. At that point, you can get funding, and it's very much more attractive.
And you've just already touched on it, right? The claim of SatVu is the world's
so it's a thermometer.
Thermometer, exactly. Yeah. But as you've mentioned, you spent quite a little bit of time on exploring different use cases for that capability of measuring temperature from space. What kind of opportunities do you see?
So there's three major markets and there's three major products to address those markets. So there's people that use infrared data already, and don't have ready access to it, or they have expensive ways of collecting it, would be clearly interested in a lower cost, more frequent, easy delivery. So it turns out it's national defense. They have some applications. They have data, but they can't easily share it with allies. So our data set is very, they're very sophisticated customers. They know exactly what they want. They just want the raw data, and they want to be able to share it. And we don't know what they do with it, but it's pretty much economic monitoring. So it's quite just for intelligence purposes, not for targeting or anything like that. So that sat well with us. Then the second big market is economic monitoring. So this ability to look at a factory, or a refinery, or any production place, even a building, I guess, just a larger building, and see whether it's active or not. You just cannot see that with what you see on Google Earth. You can't see it with radar. You need that thermal imagery to see that is active. It's not just built and being empty. And actually, with the higher resolution, you can look down at different parts of a plant and work out when the whole factory might switch on, how many shifts they're running, what they might be making this week by what's on and off, what level of productivity that is. So with optical, you're counting cars and trucks, but here you're seeing sort of inside the process, which is a terrific insight. So the unique thing about SatVu is that high resolution, that we can see the fidelity, but also the revisit, so you can look at multiple times a day, so you can see the pattern of life of a facility. And this was quite a surprise to us, that this would be one possible, and two, guess what? There's a massive market. People are making trades, buying things on the basis of readiness. When's that ship coming in? When's it offloading? When's it, we had questions like the Tesla Gigafactory. It's a massive building.
Yeah.
How ready are they to switch it on? How full is it? How active is it? And people are willing to pay, a lot of money for that insight. And we know this insight far beyond any other technology. And you can't fly drones and planes over a lot of these places, certainly not in foreign countries. And so now we have a global insight with a consistent measurement, because the measurement you get in San Francisco, Berlin, Australia is all the same. And that was the great thing about satellite, is you get that consistency. So that was the big surprise one. And then finally, it was on the climate applications. Trillions of dollars are going to be invested in climate mitigation, resilience. And if you could make that slightly more efficient in the allocation of those dollars, someone would surely pay you a lot. So that was our thesis. So we started buying some of those applications, and it's urban heat islands. Everyone knows the city's hotter than the rural areas, and some technologies can tell you on a street level. But what building precisely needs to change? What car park needs more trees? And once the trees are planted, are they being well looked after? That's the fidelity, really actionable insights. Or looking at a solar farm. Let's build more solar, but is it working? What's the yield of that farm? We can look at a solar farm and give the yield, because the panels fail in a hot state. So you need the fidelity where you can look at a 1 meter square panel, or a string of several meters, and be able to say whether things are on and off. And that's the insight that we provide. So those are the three key markets. We think we've only touched on the climate side, but the other two, we got strong traction on both of those.
Yeah, and it's it's definitely a thing no one did before on that scale, right? So we're just opening up a new market, right? It's not that people did already use these thermal analytics, so that's really exciting. And it's also great to see that you could already demonstrate it with your first satellite, like a lot of these aspects. What I found interesting is when you look in the thermal satellite companies right now, right, which are out there, like Hydrosat, Constellation, Aurora Tech, and then you actually founded 2016, so you were the first of the four. But when you look into the pitch of these companies, from an outside, all thermal, but it's very different use cases, and it's already a specialization within thermal, right? Like Aurora Tech with the wildfire monitoring focus, Constellation is more on the sustainable food, right? With the watering, etc. And you are on the commercial applications. So, on the industrial applications, I would say, right? And was it like this from 2016 onwards, or did this crystallize? Because how do you see this competition evolving?
So we were the first founded, and we will not be the first with the constellation, because of that. Those wilderness years of trying to find out what the market wanted, and we quickly discovered that resolution, revisit, and a degree of temperature accuracy was really, really important. Certainly consistency over a time series is important. You can compare one measurement with the other. And there's some massive challenges when you come to the resolution. It's you could need a huge satellite with a very large mirror to be able to collect that data, and which would be enormously expensive. And that's why these the defense satellites are so expensive. So to crack that problem of miniaturizing, getting it down to a couple hundred kilos, and getting the agility of the platform was a major breakthrough. And that's why it took us a little longer to find out who could build this, what technology we could use commercially that didn't have too many security restrictions on it, for example. So that was the key milestones. Other guys are rightly focused. If we're going to build a lower resolution system, which is slightly easier, what's the application? So what you get with the lower resolution, you get a bigger swath. So you can see a whole forest, and if there's a fire in there, you can see a large farm and whether there's water stress in there. Our data is, 4 by 4 kilometers, 16 square kilometers roughly. So you're looking at, when you look at a city, you see thousands of houses. But when you look at a farm, you're looking at a medium-sized farm. And so the data looks quite expensive per farm in that case. So it's picking the right data set for the right application. I think the other guys are going for very big markets and very valuable markets, and in the wildfire case, very high impact on carbon emissions, and I'm sure they'll do well. But what we saw was our data was applicable to many different industries and many different users, and most of them had high economic value as well. So, a lot of the GDP, our applications that apply to high GDP products, industries, cities, and so we think there's naturally a good business case there. And obviously there were some existing users as well, which we've tapped in early for those companies that understand satellite data or are using thermal imagery already.
So I know that both Constellar as well as Aurora Tech rose from, for example, the Fraunhofer Institute, which is a big R&D institution in Germany, and Aurora Tech from the Technical University of Munich. You said that exactly came from one company and then established SatVu as a standalone. Did you do the R&D by yourself, which allowed you to get to these breakthroughs, or where was that R&D conducted?
So I went back to my history, my commercial roots. I've always outsourced the construction of satellites, and the skill is defining the product well, getting a firm fixed price and schedule, and leaning on the company that has the good heritage, has the hundreds of people, has the thousands of years of experience in building satellites, and getting them to build the product you want. So we finessed the specification and the application, but we pushed the development onto the manufacturers. So we did a lot of work on finding what was the right technology to solve the problem, who could integrate that technology in space, who could build the right satellite at the right cost and the right quantity. And so that was also part of the fundamental journey. Now, once we've identified that, then you want to lock that technology up. So we have exclusivities and access to the IP. That means it's effectively ours. So no one else can go to that manufacturer and say, I want a copy of what SatVu are building for commercial uses. That's all legally sewn up so that can't happen. So we've got the advantages of working basically for a subsidiary of Airbus. It's a subsidiary that actually came out of the university as well. So they had that sort of startup mentality. But the maturity of, somebody that you would fly on an Airbus plane, so why wouldn't you buy an Airbus satellite? And I bought, well, not me personally, but the companies I work for have bought Airbus satellites. So that they're a well-known entity.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's most likely one of the reasons why you only, quote unquote, have only 50 people, right? Which is quite small if you compare it to other satellite companies, which have typically. I've just looked up the number of, for example, ISI, right? A little bit bigger company, but they have more than 600 employees by now, or a Capella Space, which is 300 around employees, right? So, or even also some of the other infrared companies, I think, have a little bit more employees than you have. But that explains it, right? You outsource the development and the construction of these satellites, which makes a lot of sense. Asset light, you could say.
Yeah, and I mean, like a similar stage, like Roatec, right? Like twice the amount of employees, right? Like just looking it up on LinkedIn, 111 employees. So, but they also develop a lot in house. And I think at the beginning they even want to do everything on their own. Now the bus is, at Spire, as people know, and they announce. So they also seem to go more into the model you are also doing, and maybe that's a good thing that you all had all this experience from the past, so you could avoid a lot of mistakes, right, directly from the get-go. So that's
Yeah, I like to think so. So I mean, the successes and the failures. I mean, we have had the first satellite didn't last as long as we wanted. So that being ready for that recovery, having experience in what to do in those situations has also been very helpful. That many of the team have gone through that before. So yeah, we found that the staff that we have, the team we have, we were actually at about 40 people now, so slightly less than the 50 we did have, and they are very experienced both on satellite as a whole, but also on the data applications.
Yeah.
So I think we can brag that we got the best high resolution analysts and scientists, possibly in the world, certainly in the commercial world. And it's amazing when you have a room full of people like that for an extended period, the innovations that you can come up with.
Yeah.
And so the product we first light image from our first satellite is what we have now is completely different, and it's much better. And yeah, we've used this time between the two satellites to develop better products, better raw products, derivatives, a better delivery platform. All these things we've taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And so the satellite, if you build your own, you get sucked into that. It's such a distraction because it's really complicated project, and ours is not a small CubeSat. It's quite a unique beast. It's quite big. It's sophisticated. Has to be high precision, and that would have taken a lot of people, a lot of management time, a lot of money, and a lot of risk.
Yeah.
We've tried to retire as much as possible and concentrate where we think the value is with what the customers want. And as you say, it's a new phenomenology, getting it into the terms where normal people can ingest it into their workflows. It's the most important part, as well as having this unique data set.
Yeah. And I want to touch on this because, as you've mentioned, right, thermal imagery is a new mode of satellite imagery, at least in the commercial market. And so sometimes it's potentially difficult to see a commercial uptake of that because the buyers might not know what to do with the data sets. So do you sell the imagery, the raw imagery? Do you sell analytics? Do you sell something in between? So what's the offering?
So we have three products. One is basically the raw imagery with the metadata. You can the basic product we sell is a cleaned up version of the image, although you can buy the true raw at some point as well. That product comes with different levels of tasking and delivery and responsiveness. You can hold it back from the archive, etc. So that's pretty standard product, looks the same and is delivered in a platform which is the same as many of the our contemporaries. But it addresses those companies that are familiar with Earth observation data, really.
Yeah.
So it is the resellers, the analytics companies, people that use satellite data on a day-to-day basis. But the bigger market is with people who just want the insight.
Yeah.
So they want to know what they're looking at. So the next level of product is, here's a picture of a factory. I want to know when this pump is running, because when that's running, I know they're shipping certain, data, there's certain products, or they're producing it. There's 4 pumps. How many of them are on? That tells me how many, the quantity they're shipping on a day-to-day basis. So just tell me the trend on that data, and we can provide that as a data series, and you'd never have to look at the imagery. Then beyond that, we actually, like most other satellites companies, we actually own the image and we only license it to our customers.
Yeah.
So we've started to collect a larger and larger archive, which is available for sale as well. But we can take different slices of that data and create indices, which might be per country or per region or per company, looking at industrial output in that case. And industrial output is also a proxy for carbon emissions. So we're looking at a lot of high energy businesses, oil refineries, aluminum smelting, cement factories. They're all high carbon emission facilities. So if you can see whether they're on or off, you can have a view on the carbon emissions, and maybe, especially if they're in supply chains where you don't easily have access to verification data, we now become the single source of truth on your supply chain, which is traditionally one of the hardest things to measure.
Yeah. It's what I think is very interesting about your use cases, like the activity of inside the building, is that you may not need other satellite data sources, right? Like you may not need optical or radar. Whereas for other use cases, if you combine different modalities, you can build a better product, right? Is that a right assumption, or do you actually acquire also imagery from other satellite operators to solve a problem for your customers in gen?
So our data is quite informative just by itself. When you look at it, whether it's day or night, it looks like a color set that's on a optical satellite. So you can look at a street, grid system. You can see the streets, you can see the gardens, you can see the buildings, the vehicles. Actually, on vehicles, it's a video camera, so you can have a 1 minute video, and so you can see things moving as well. So it's pretty intuitive. You don't need to be specialized like you do with SAR to sort of understand what's going on. But I would say, because there's 2 factors. One is the scene size that we have, and our satellites are tasking satellites. So we're not collecting cities and then trying to sell the data. The customer comes to our platform, says, I want to see this feature. We optimize the constellation to take that feature. We process the data, put it on the platform, and it's ready for sale. So by the time we've taken the image, it's already paid for in effect, whereas other models are different. So it tends to address customers who know what they want, or to verify in a higher resolution. They've been looking at a building. They've seen lots of trucks come in. When is that building going to come live? When's it going to come hot? Then they would task us to go, oh, look, this, and this is on in that battery. This is 2 weeks from production. That's a meaningful information for me to make a trade, a commodity trade, or something like that. So we feel that we will be used to verify things on activity. So there will be other data sets. There could be even closer fusion of data when you look at other phenomenologies as well. So yeah, I think that the verification of on-off is probably the easiest one to explain at this point.
So as you've mentioned, there's a lot of commercial demand. We've read somewhere that you had around 100 million pounds or even more than that in, can you say commercial uptake agreements, or how could you quantify the interest when we're speaking about certain dollar or pound demand?
So what we did before we launched this first satellite, it was under construction for like 18 months, I guess, altogether. But
Yeah.
we put the camera on a plane and we flew it up and down and over 5 countries, and for over 12 months. So we had a huge archive of different data sets and of different features, and it helped us explore who would buy this data, what would be of interest. And we put this all on our platform because we wanted to test out our platform as well. So it was a great way of having the beta version of the platform. And we invited customers to look at this, but there was a caveat. They needed to make a commitment on how much data they might buy, what price, what the value add was. We needed feedback from them on our platform, on our data. So from that, we built a revenue pipeline of who would be the early adopters, what's their budgets, how quickly would they buy, what's their internal process. So we had this dialogue.
Smart.
And if you added up those sort of 3-year commitments, 3 to 5 year commitments, you got to a very, very large number. So we called this our early access program because the people that signed up and gave us this information had exclusive use to this early aircraft data, and they could start seeing, they could layer it on their own proprietary data, they could lay it on other ground truths to see the accuracy of it. And this is where, the economic activity use case sort of came out. And so like these guys, like, you can see things weeks before anybody else, and we want to know this globally. But we're going to buy this as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Now, some of them said, we've got the GIS department that can use this from day one. And others said, no, you need to give us a trend line and tell us when this part of the plant is working or not. And some even wanted even higher level insights.
Yeah.
So it was a great purpose on that. From that, we created our revenue pipeline. So when we launched the first satellite, we started converting the customers into revenue contracts. Unfortunately, the satellite failed a few months afterwards. So that was put on hold. But what we've done in the interim is get pre-bookings for the new satellites, which are going up, will be ready for launch next year.
Yeah.
So that's been a great exercise. So on the basis of real satellite data, on the basis of the platform delivery, we've addressed proper revenue contracts. So not just letters of intent, but proper revenue contracts, minimum quantity size over sort of 1 to 3 years. And we've had a significant number of customers signing up for that.
Yeah, I hear a lot of things VCs would love asset light model, and then exactly the way you approach the business development side of things. So with the 100 million pounds plus in kind of like order backlog, just curious, like the business development team within your organization, does this make up more than 50% of the organization, less than that? Like how's the split within your team?
We went for quality rather than quantity. So the team we have, they have immense experience in selling equivalent data, typically optical data. They've worked for mature companies, they work for startup companies. They know the contracting process, particularly for the early adopters, the people who understand infrared. So they know the contracting, that their contacts information is known. They know the budget size. So we managed to leapfrog a lot of. We went to the people we knew would get a good sale from, and the relationship was there. So actually, a few people have had tremendous success, and it's also the quality of the data, right? So when you see it, you are amazed at the detail that you're looking at, and the more you know about what you're looking at, you think, my God, that's a revolution. I've never seen stuff like that before. And yeah, that's made, and the way it's being delivered, the contracts we have are, pretty industry standard. So we just made it familiar and easy for the customers to come on board. So yeah, that's where a bit of maturity has really helped.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look then into the time from 2016 to 2023, you did a lot of things right. Right. The satellite was getting matured. It launched in I think it was June 23, right? You closed multiple rounds, so you also had 30 pounds in venture capital funding, and then the images were great. I mean, we met each other from time to time also at events and so on. And then we said, hey, let's like SatVu is really getting traction, etc. Let's schedule a podcast. We scheduled the podcast for the 11th of December, 2023. That was the original time. And yeah, I couldn't find the exact day when the satellite failed. I don't know, was it the 11th, but the media was writing about this on the 15th of December. That's why we had to cancel the podcast, right?
Yes.
Yeah, back then.
It was not a good day, a good week anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. So this is now, of course, a big topic we also wanted to talk about, and I think which people are interested. So we then took some time, right? Like now it's September to actually record this episode, because I think so I know meeting you, etc. That it's still yeah. The way you used the time the last 9 months was really impressive, I have to say. So maybe can you talk us a bit through your feelings when the satellite launched, and your reactions? Maybe you can explain a bit how that went.
Launched or failed, or both?
Failed, yeah, but both, maybe. Both. That, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when it launches, it's a tremendous relief. We were pressured for time. Things were taking longer. We still had supply chain issues from COVID, etc. But yeah, it launched, and it was a fantastic day. Of course, SpaceX are clapping when it launches. We're clapping when we hear first contact, and it survived the launch. And then even more 2 weeks later when we get to see the first light image, and the camera actually was better than we predicted. So all this plane data that we collected, we downgraded to what we thought the satellite would look like, and we downgraded it more than we should have. It's better than we initially showed. So this was, euphoria in the company. The customers were getting exciting. They were signing up. I think in the first month, I think we had over 100 inbound inquiries. We signed up 17 resellers in the first period. So all the pipeline was crystallizing. We were on target for our revenues for that year. And on the back of that, we decided time to go for Series B. Not just have one satellite in space, but let's go for the constellation, or at least get that going. And so we were on the road show, getting a lot of interest, especially on our great story. And then it failed, that week that you mentioned. And so it all came crumbling down quite severely. So yeah, if you, being the CEO, founder, co-founder, you really know it when you have a failure like that. Because even my co-founder looked at me and goes, now what? So, because he's not from the space industry, he was there to do something with data, and so all of a sudden it disappeared. And so you get, the staff, your management, the customers, the investors, the press are all looking at the CEO going, now what are you going to do? So fortunately, we had full insurance. We did have a lot of, so we could claim on insurance and get the second satellite ordered, which we did very, very quickly. Spun up that team. We had a lot of interest from the customers. The investors that we were talking to said, fine, come back when you've got when you come back in a month or so and tell us what the story is. So we've had enough money to be fully financed for the replacement satellite, actually to a break-even point, so not even a cash-out point. So if necessary, we can, because the financial situation around that time was pretty dire as well for fundraising, and fundraising on the back of a failure could be difficult unless you showed a very good story. The customers were great. We had these early bookings and commitments that people said they would buy because they liked what they saw and they wanted to reserve the capacity on the first couple of satellites. And on the back of that, we came up with a plan to just fund the third satellite. So we've been closing funding on that. Existing investors were fully supportive on that, so that's been great. So by February, we have basically had a turnaround plan. And the interesting thing was, now we had live data, real data from the satellite. The product teams and the scientists could do real things, and the customers were convinced that the technology worked, because the failure wasn't around the new IP. It was around a power circuit that was, low probability to fail. It's pretty standard, but it did fail. So it was more of a reliability problem, which can be fixed, rather than, the camera's blurred or something like that. That would have been a disaster, that type of failure. But actually, the camera worked better than we expected. The spacecraft worked well. So we had a lot of confidence. And we've basically turned it around, and we've turned it into an advantage in that we have real data now. So when we launch the first satellite, we'll have more of a backlog of customers than we had before. We got guaranteed customers from day one. So all we have to do is switch on the satellite, and basically they'll start ordering and paying. So the revenue should ramp very, very quickly. And secondly, we're building the product layers that we've talked about. So the basic product is much better. The platform is fantastic, and we're developing more insights so that the value of the product will be better. It'll be easier to consume. And so we're really taking advantage of this time. Very few companies at our stage can get a failure, be fully funded for 2 satellites, not have customers asking questions, and yet have a great team that can concentrate on building the best product ever. It's a unique situation. We'd rather have revenues, don't get me wrong, but we've got a fully funded team, a great plan coming up for next year, and we can be so creative and generate some fantastic things. So we really tried to make the best of a bad situation.
Yeah, and when you consider that it was fully insured, right? I mean, when you launch a satellite as the first satellite, it's hard to utilize the capacity of it, right? So then you have it 2 years in orbit, and you maybe use 10% of the capacity. Now that's also a positive thing, you could say, right? That you now, when the next satellite launches, you already have the demand, you have the technology based on the data you build. So that's all. That's resilience, right? You made out of the very bad situation. There's still you will still find something good, right, as an entrepreneur. And I'm also super happy to see that you had enough runway, etc., right? Because it's a really exciting thing. And I mean, it was all
you have to make that. You have to be judicious with the money, spend it in the right way, so that you're not gonna run out of cash just before you launch and things like that.
So yeah, and it was 130 kilogram mass satellite, right? So bigger than that, yeah. So there, it's also, we're not talking about a CubeSat for a few K, right? So it's a serious, it's a machine, yeah. So that's yeah. So I mean, looking at the time, like one question I would like to ask you here, with all that experience you made, also launching the company and satellites with a failure, ordering the next one, what would be your number one advice for other founders who want to build a Earth observation company with their own hardware?
With your own hardware. So it's a great thing. So we own the source of this high resolution it's not a commonly owned satellite, so that gives us a big moat and defensibility around others. It was quite hard to invent this and to get it right and to do the data processing. We're way ahead of everybody else on that. So it is worth finding a way to own the hardware, the source, at least the source of the data, and particularly if you've got many applications for that data as well. So if it integrates well with other things, and so yeah, find that unique thing and refine it to the nth degree, and market led. Don't invent something and then try and find the market. Find the problem, or at least the problems, and then invent the perfect solution.
Before we come to an end, what's next to SatVu?
So next year is a great year. So we're continuing the evolution of the products. We've got some great ideas on applications. We're going to really take it to the end user and say, did you know you can do this with our data? So people are not so familiar. So those new markets beyond those satellite experts. I think we've addressed the satellite experts. So the product we've got is great for that, and the delivery, etc. Secondly, is scaling. So we're building two satellites are under construction. Both will be ready to launch next year. So yeah, getting those into space as soon as possible, proving that the customers sign up. So we want the customers to sign up and start tasking immediately as soon as it's been commissioned, so that proves revenue. And from there, we will be able to raise more money to scale out the whole constellation. That's the plan.
So I can definitely say that also we have come across a few use cases where customers asked us whether we can do something in the area of thermal. And the problem for us always was, yeah, we would love to, but there's no data set which can give us or help us to provide insights to our customers. So we are also here at LiveView very much looking forward for the launch of these new satellites, and then looking forward to buying data. But before we end it,
you can make a booking anytime you like.
Yeah. We will definitely do so. I know that Daniel and you are going to meet in Paris at the World Satellite Business Week in a few weeks. Maybe we brainstorm until then for a few custom ideas which came up over the last few years. Exactly. Before we close it, I mean, this was really, really cool and really interesting. I would have tons of more questions.
A lot,
yeah, exactly. But maybe for a second part, after your second satellite launch, maybe we can have a second episode of that, and then we can maybe speak about some real life examples where customers are using these data sets. Because I think this is really, really cool, because it's just such a different modality. But we always end the podcast with one question. Which is like, who do you think should we have next on one of our episodes?
You should have some of our customers and ask them, what else do they need? What do they want from Earth observation? Because I think there's a lot of problems which haven't been solved yet. And that's the challenge of the industry, is to solve some of these issues.
Yeah.
We on our iPhone, we have two classic satellite applications. We've got navigation and we've got weather.
Yeah.
Nothing's really changed for many, many years. So Google Earth doesn't really inform you that much. But there's such a wealth of solutions that we could have with the fusion of the right satellite data with other proprietary data sets. And I don't think we're addressing that well enough. And if you speak to the customers, they basically tell you what the problem is.
Right.
That's a really good idea. Like we didn't have an end user yet on the
podcast. The podcast. We should change that.
Nice. So yeah, Anthony, thanks a lot for your time. And I know you're pretty busy, and we really appreciate this. So for the listeners, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and make sure that you also follow SatVu on all the socials, connect with Anthony and the team, and also leave a comment here on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, wherever you are, wherever we meet you, and see you in the next one. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks, Anthony.
See you in Paris.
See you. Bye now.